Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk all about my favorite character, Slay the Spire 2, and how I'm winning 85% of my runs with the Ironclad on A10. So just a few thoughts about the character. It feels really smooth, like Act 1 and Act 2 are almost a breeze. And then if you know how to scale into Act 3, it's also fairly straightforward. And I think the best thing is like 90% of the cards on the character are useful and they play well together. So you don't have this issue of not being able to find cards that are good for your deck. So really, like most runs, the only time I've lost is through to catastrophic misplays of my own fault. And so I think if you're playing tight and highly focused, you could get up to 95% or higher A10 win rate. And my win rate's climbing. It's just 85% is the average over, my last 25 runs or whatever. So I think if I tighten on my play, getting up to 85%, totally doable. I'm posting a ton of example runs. I did a deep dive into this character over the last 2 weeks. So I've posted quite a few runs. There's like 15 left to post. So definitely be checking out my videos if you want to see some examples of this in action. But with that, let's just get into it. So here's an overview of what we're going to talk about. First, what changes at A10? I think that's really important to highlight for people who are struggling. And by A10, I mean like A9, 8. Like A10 is just the accumulation of all of the other Ascensions. So really, I mean, what's different at A10 relative to like Ascension 0 or Ascension 5? Then we're going to talk about what cards to look for, what solves you need specifically to handle A10. We're going to talk about Relics. The Ironclad specifically does so well with Relics. And then just how this character loses, which to be honest, isn't much. So again, when I say what changes on A10, I just mean high Ascension in general. But the biggest change is like Ascension 9, where they increase the damage of all enemies, and small damage is essentially unavoidable. Because in this instance, usually you could like block 10, you take 1 damage, it's not that big of a deal. But block 10, take 3, it feels like it's a small percentage increase, right? Going from 11 to 13, but that's 3 times as much. I'm going to say unavoidable damage because, you have to attack the enemies at some point. So it's about 3 times as much unavoidable damage, and that part is significant. So it's not the absolute change doesn't matter so much, but it's the relative change over what you can expect to block on a given turn that matters. And Ascension 9 basically triples that for most enemies. And then Ascension 8 makes it harder to kill them, so basically small damage becomes nearly unavoidable. And so over the course of a run, if you stumble at all, you have any dead draws, the fights are going to go longer. And because there's more unavoidable damage or very hard to avoid damage, the longer the fights go, the more likely you are to die, essentially. And so at A10, you need to change the way you draft and ask yourself, what problems does my deck need to solve right now? Instead of just, what would I like my deck to do, right? It's not, how am I going to beat Act 3? It's, how am I going to beat the next fight and the next fight? So it's not just like what you're drafting, but also the order that you're drafting it in too. And so here's a graph, kind of a mock-up graph I made of at higher Ascension, like A10, you basically need your strength to always be increasing with each floor, or constant. But at lower Ascension, you can get away with having like a dip in strength if you take a card that will be useful later. And so it's this difference that's very important. And yeah, if you have like a dip in strength, that would represent like dying on A10. So you just need to have a deck that's strong at every single floor, and you're just always making it stronger. You're not taking a short-term hit for a long-term payoff. Just every floor you're getting stronger and stronger. Because again, on lower Ascension, you can do stuff like take Rupture, but not have any payoff for it and be like, this will be good later. If you do that on higher Ascension, you're going to die in the valley of strength before you can build towards it. And so to make this work on higher Ascension, we need to change the way that we're drafting so that we draft immediate benefits in a way that seamlessly transitions into scaling, right? So you don't want to take Rupture first if you have no damage, but if you take all of these damage cards, right? If you need early damage, you grab a Hemokinesis, maybe you then grab a Breakthrough to solve your AoE problem, you get a Blood Wall to block, then you can take Rupture later on in the run, and then you can get that boost of scaling. It's not a dip in strength for your deck anymore. So this mindset change is really important of, I need to make my deck strong now, but then we also need to just change how we draft, because it's not, cards aren't just strong in a vacuum, right? It depends on which you can take early. And so specifically cards that you can take early that transition into archetypes are so powerful and so important on A10. And so learning these like pathways that you can take, if you go Hemokinesis, Breakthrough, Blood Wall, Rupture, learning these routes you can take into builds is the most important part of getting through the high Ascension runs. And so we're going to cover all of those today. I'm going to start with the commons because these are the cards you're going to see almost every single run. The best ones by far are Breakthrough, Bloodletting, and Blood Wall. You can tell I quite like the self-damage archetype, but these cards are just good. Blood Wall, it's effectively 14 block for 2, which is quite nice, especially unupgraded. Bloodletting's just the best card. Maybe on any character, it's just so good. And it's fine early because you can play like 4 or 5 cards with it, but then late game it scales so hard. And then Breakthrough is such a good early game solve. It's excellent in Act 1, really good in Act 2. Just, yeah, these are like the 3 commons that I'm just so excited to take early because they're excellent on their own and they scale so well. True Grit also is S tier, but it requires an upgrade to get there. So it is hard to take this card early because usually you're upgrading something else. But if you get it upgraded, take it. And if you have an abundance of upgrades, like you have like 4 fires in your route, you can also take it because this is such a good enabler later on. And then later on, we have like Tremble and Molten Fist. These cards are just in a tier below these 3. They just do less, but the opportunity cost is lower because they both self-exhaust. Tremble got updated, but the card database is still old. So Tremble now self-exhausts. So like late game, they don't really clog up your deck because you play them and they exhaust. But then the fact that they exhaust and do vulnerable stuff both lets you path into different archetypes. And Tremble is kind of like Terror if you've played Slay the Spire 1. It just 3 or 4 vulnerable is effectively infinite in terms of how long the fights should be going for the Ironclad. So Tremble's pretty cool to take early because it just makes all of your damage so high. And then Thunderclap is B tier. It's fine. Hitting all enemies can be nice. And especially early on, this can boost your damage because it makes all your strikes hit for 9. And it hits all the enemies. So it's fine, but it's worse than the rest. But I still take it sometimes. Bloodletting specifically, kind of just the best card on the character. I basically take this always. Getting up to like 3 bloodlettings might be too many, but like the first upgraded bloodletting does so much. Usually 2 bloodlettings I'm fine having. It's just good. If you haven't tried it, definitely take it. And the thing that's weird about this character is like it has uncommon energy generation that's very situational, and the common is just better. It's effectively like Forgotten Ritual, 1 energy to add 3 is the same as 0 to add 2, but this has like a required trigger condition, and this one doesn't, and losing HP is effectively an upside on this card. So it's just like better than the uncommon energy generators. So I don't take these that often just because I take Bloodletting, and it's a common, so you're going to see it, quite often during a run. But then, if you've drafted these cards early, you can then kind of seamlessly transition into mid to late game with Rupture, Inferno, and Terra Sunder. And so you get this built-in scaling for your deck by just taking the good cards early. Similarly, if you take Tremble, Molten Fist, and Thunderclap, you can transition into the Vulnerable archetype, which is also very powerful. And then True Grit, Molten Fist, and Tremble all self-exhaust. So then that can get you into like Feel No Pain, Dark Embrace, Ashen Strike, the Exhaust archetype, essentially. And so we need to be thinking about what we're taking now. It makes our deck strong now, and it could make our deck strong later. There are some just generically good commons. These don't synergize with anything, but pretty happy to take them. Like it's hard to have too many Shrug-It-Offs and Pommel Strikes because they all draw a card, especially if you can upgrade the Pommel Strike. This is like one of the best cards in the character. Anger, especially in Act 1, is just great. It just does good damage for 0 energy. I love it. And then Headbutt and Sword Boomerang are fine. They fall off a little bit in Act 2, but Sword Boomerang in particular is basically the best strength payoff card besides Whirlwind. So if you think you're going to have any relics that give you strength or any like reliable strength gain, Sword Boomerang becomes S tier because it's, 4 times the strength. If you get an upgrade, it does 3 damage 4 times. That's so good with strength scaling. These are the few commons that I would just try to avoid if you can. They're fine in Act 1, but the problem is they don't transition into a build in Act 2 and 3. And the most difficult thing for the Ironclad is scaling past Act 1. So if you just don't have these cards in your deck, then it's much easier to just scale seamlessly. So I would try to avoid them, but sometimes you do just need to take them to survive, and they can be useful. So I'm not saying never take them, but if you're offered other cards that just give you the opportunity to go into archetypes, take those because these are kind of just a dead end most of the time. Then we get into uncommons you should be looking for. Burning Pact, Dominate, Inferno, and Colossus are just S tier. Maybe Colossus should be B tier or A tier, but because taking it on its own doesn't do that much, it's just to defend. But the upside is so high, and the opportunity cost of just getting a defend in your deck isn't that high because in the mid to late game, this can just block for like 35 because it says the enemies do half damage. So if you're being attacked for like 45, instead of being attacked for 45, you're just being attacked for like 22. And then it blocks for 5. So it like blocks for 27 in that instance. So Colossus is a very good card. And then Dominate gives you all the strength scaling you need, but it's also just acceptable on its own. Like Burning Pact, Dominate, Inferno are all cards you can just take. They're totally playable, but then they scale so well into archetypes. Same with Uppercut, Taunt, like they're just so good at base rate. Like this is good block, this is good damage, weak is excellent, but then they let you transition into a vulnerable archetype. And then same with these two. These are fine. I haven't actually made Second Wind work, but I know it is a good card. I just have been working like usually I get offered like this in Burning Pact. I'm just gonna take Burning Pact over it almost every time. So these cards are totally fine to have. You can make them work. They're just more situational than the others. But Second Wind in particular is quite good at getting rid of like curses and statuses. Like if you're fighting the fish boss, I would definitely take this because you could just get rid of all of the beckons and then it kind of trivializes that fight. So there's definitely situations where these are good. And then for generically good uncommon, these are things, they don't really go into any archetypes, but they're just fine. The first Battle Trance I think is S tier. It's just such good card draw. I'm never mad to have the first one. The second one is like B tier, and then 3 copies of Battle Trance is pretty sketchy because when you're drawing into Battle Trances with Battle Trance, it just feels really bad because you can't draw off the next one. So I try to have 1 copy or 2 at the most of this card, but I'm very happy to have the first copy. Stone Armor, if you can get an upgrade, it's basically twice as good. 4 plating represents 10 total block. 6 plating represents 21 total block. So it's more than twice as much block when upgraded. When unupgraded, it's probably B or C tier. It's not that good, but if you can get an upgrade, it's amazing. And then these are all A tier, just kind of generically good cards. And then these are B tier. Most of the uncommons are quite playable, but these are the ones that you don't need a lot to make them work. Maybe Stampede is the only one, like, I'm only taking this if I have some 2-cost and 3-cost attacks. So like Stampede with Uppercut, for example, is quite strong because you're just playing a 2-cost attack for free every turn. So yeah, I like that one quite a bit. These are some of the uncommons that I try to avoid if I can, because they're usually dead by Act 2. But sometimes you just need the strength. Bludgeon in particular can be really good in Act 1, so if your deck is struggling or you don't have better options, there's no problem taking Bludgeon in Act 1. You just have to be aware that it probably is going to fall off in Act 2 and 3. Like, it's not going to be a major part of your scaling, unless you get some things to play around it. And then it's great. Like, if you get Snekawai with Bludgeon, go for it. Have a great time. Cascade with Bludgeon is great. Stampede with Bludgeon is great. So there's definitely ways to make it work. It's just more narrow in what it can do than some of the other good scaling cards. So just be aware of it, but it's totally playable. I regularly take Rampage too, because sometimes you just need it to get through the Act 1 boss. It's not the best card ever, but, you know, it does 9 and then 18. Like, it's fine, but eventually it's kind of just like a strike in your deck, which is okay. But if you can draft in a way where you don't have these cards in your deck, then you just don't have to worry about them falling off at all, because you'll just have cards that are always going to be great. And then rares to look for, Crimson Mantle and Stoke are just S tier. Like, they're both, like, you take them always and just play them and they're always good. Crimson Mantle in particular, the life loss per turn triggers Rupture, triggers Inferno. It sets up for the thing that does damage for each time you are hit. If you have Self-Forming Clay, this blocks for like 11 for free every turn. It's just so good. You can get builds where Crimson Mantle is the only block card in your deck. And it carries, right? I've had 2 Crimson Mantles and then Self-Forming Clay that blocks for like 26 every turn for free. And then you just don't need defend cards. And then Stoke, they changed it, so now it creates a card for every card exhausted. So it's a bunch of repeatable exhaust triggers Early on, you can stoke away like your starter cards into good cards, and then late game, you can stoke away like statuses. You can stoke just to grow the number of exhausts if you have like. There's just so many things to make this work. And then these cards are all A tier. Like you'll basically play them in any deck. Brand has so many good keywords. Lose 1 HP, great. Exhaust a card and gain a strength. This basically plays in like every archetype of the character, and it costs 0. You can use it to shrink your deck. It's really good. Similar with Fiendfire and Thrash. Like these do damage and exhaust cards, so they're both excellent. And then some generically good rares that you could just take. Like these 3 Immolate, Primal Force, Unmovable, Offering. I'm just taking. They're good always. Doesn't require much setup to make these do stuff. 1-2 Punch, Feed, Mangle, and Conflagration. I'm just pretty happy to have. They work most of the time. Interestingly, right now, I don't value Feed as highly as I did in Slay the Spire 1. Probably because we don't have the heart. And I don't feel like max HP matters that much. So I think once we get Act 4, Feed probably goes up to S tier. Because then you can get more cumulative scaling to help you beat Act 4. But right now, I don't feel like I need max HP to beat the bosses because you can kill them. They don't have that much health, and you can kill them pretty quickly. So I don't feel the need for Feed. Pyre and Cascade are awesome if you have an upgrade. They're quite worse if you don't have an upgrade. And then Aggression, I've honestly never played the card. It's probably fine, probably like A tier, but I've just never had it in my deck, so I can't comment on that one specifically. And then these are usually trap cards or like very uncommon builds. Demon Form can salvage a run. If you just have no scaling, you can take a Demon Form and like you will kill the boss eventually, but you would like to avoid doing that if you can. So basically, don't take it unless you need to. And if you need to, it's the best card you could hope for. But otherwise, like a Dominate kind of just does the same thing. And then like Barricade Juggernaut, like the block deck can work, but it's so rare that you're almost never taking these. Hellraiser, if you have an infinite, like if you have 3 or 4 pommel strikes and you can shrink your deck, go for it. But just raw taking a Hellraiser doesn't offer that much benefit. It's kind of like gain 1 energy every turn if you play a strike for free, which is just not that good. And they're played on a random target, so it's worse than that because you can't control where the damage is going. But if you can make an infinite, this card's totally serviceable. So with that, here's a list of essentially all of the cards that I'm quite happy to pick in early packs. And you'll notice there are so many of them. This character has a very deep card pool, and there are so many good cards on it. So any of these, if I see them in Act 1, I'm just taking them, very happy about it. You don't have to worry about like what build you're going into or what's coming up. They're just going to be good. These are some of the payoffs that I'm aiming to build towards. These are, I think, in my opinion, the best ones. In the right build, all of these cards are S tier, but most of these cards you can't take early. Like you can't just slam an early Rupture if you don't have the enablers for it. So that's why we draft these cards first. Then you get your Crimson Mantle, your Bloodlettings, your Blood Walls, your Breakthroughs. Then you can take the Rupture, and then you can go into the build. So basically, we're taking these cards early so that we can build strength over the first couple picks, you know, all of Act 1. And then we can start taking these cards once we have the setup to support them. There is some exceptions. I think Inferno and Dominate are just good enough on their own where they don't really need setup. Like you could take these at any time and they're just good. Kind of true with Ashen Strike as well. If you're playing on A10, this with Ascender's Bane hits for 9, which is just acceptable. And then it scales up quite well. But like Cruelty, Dark Embrace, Feel No Pain, Rupture, Vicious, and Tear Asunder, you need a little bit more work to make these go big. And then just another summary, these are the cards that I just generally avoid. None of them are unplayable necessarily, but if you can get out of Act 1 not having any of these in your deck, that's great. But a lot of times you do have to take 1 or 2 of them just to survive, and that's also fine. You just don't want to build a deck that's based on all of these because it doesn't scale well into the late game. So for Ascension 10, you basically need 4 different solves. You need something to handle multi-enemy combats. You need a way to scale your damage up for the bosses. You need a plan for blocking, and then you don't need it, but a plan to draw through your deck is extremely helpful. Worth mentioning, you can skip multi-enemy combat solves if your damage is high enough where you could just like single target all of them down instantly, but having a solve for multi-enemy combats in my opinion, is the easiest way to make the game so much easier on the Ironclad. And it's actually pretty straightforward. You basically just try and get 1 to 3 of these by Act 2. And that's it. Whirlwind in particular can make Act 2 so easy because the multi-hit can take care of all the cockroaches. You can one-shot the centipedes with it. It's just really good. And then Breakthrough Inferno, they stack together so nicely where this just gives you so much AoE. Inferno, in my opinion, is like one of the best cards to get through Act 2 on the Ironclad because it just handles the cockroaches or all the other multi-enemy fights. And then if you have Inferno and Breakthrough, you're doing 15 damage to all enemies for 1 energy. So yeah, if you can pick these up, it's going to make your life so much easier in Act 2 and Act 1. So get those, get your solve, breeze through Act 2 and have a good time. Damage scaling, these are the S tier ones. I would say 95% of my runs right now end up winning with one of these 4 scaling cards: Ashen Strike, Dominate, Rupture, and Tear Asunder. They all are essentially capable of one-shotting the boss if you do them correctly. It's all you need. If you get one of these, you can just spec into that and be okay. If you don't find these, you can win with like Bully, Thrash, or Cruelty. These are both pretty good and decently reliable scaling. If you don't find these, you can get some other more generic forms of scaling like Demon Form, some regular strength boosts like Inflame, Fight, and Brand. I have had success with like 1-2 punch plus Thrash. It scales much faster. And then if you're playing a block build, which I have done in the past, it's just hard to make it work. Body Slam can also give you decent damage scaling. It's just rare to make it happen. And something I want to talk about Stoke specifically. This card's just so good. It's one of the best scaling cards. It's good early, it's good late. It gives you a repeatable source of exhaust. So like every time you stoke your whole hand, it basically adds like 20 to 30 damage to your Ashen Strike. If you have an active Feel No Pain, it can block for like 20. It can improve your deck if you're stoking away like statuses or your starter cards. You can get upgraded random cards. So you can find whatever solve you need. If you don't have an Ashen Strike, you could stoke until you get an Ashen Strike and then use that to scale. So Stoke is one of the best possible cards on the character. It's just really good. So another form of scaling to look out for is this one. It's also good as a block plan if you have Feel No Pain. But in terms of block plans, I would say these are S tier. Feel No Pain, Colossus, Impervious, and Crimson Mantle. All excellent. Crimson Mantle is my favorite because it doesn't require any like setup. But if you're in the Exhaust archetype, Feel No Pain is great. If you're invulnerable, Colossus is great. Impervious is just always good. And then these are like fine block. Like you could just take quite a few Shrug It Offs and Taunts and Unmovables, and you can block enough with those. I've had great success with that. And then Uppercut and Mangle are both sort of block. They're like attacks. Weaken can drop their attacks by quite a bit, and Mangle can block the multi-hit attacks very successfully. There's a lot of like 11 by 3s or 9 by 5s where Mangle just blocks for 30 to 40 damage. So I'm actually kind of happy with Mangle in Act 2 and 3 because it can just block for so much. But it's not really a block plan. It's just if you have it in your deck at the right time, it can prevent a ton of damage. In terms of building a card draw plan for the character, these are most of the cards that I'm looking for. Vicious, Dark Embrace, and Burning Pact are all S tier. One Vicious can single-handedly solve all of your card draw problems. Same with Dark Embrace. Burning Pact is very similar. If you upgrade it, it draws 3 for 1, and you exhaust the dead draw, so you get through your deck more efficiently. Worth mentioning Centennial Puzzle too. I think the Ironclad has such a great relationship with Centennial Puzzle that this can essentially be your draw plan solved too. And then if you don't get those, Battle Trance and Pommel Strike, particularly upgraded Pommel Strike, are all very serviceable card draw plans as well. But I want to highlight this interaction of Centennial Puzzle. The first time you lose HP, draw 3 cards. So if you have Bloodletting with Centennial Puzzle, this becomes like add 2 to 3 energy, draw 3 cards for 0. It's so good. So Ironclad really likes Relics because they can enable builds like this, and it's so powerful. And that brings us into, you should be taking Elites for Relics. Ironclad is so good versus Act 1 to 2 Elites, and so you should use this to establish your build, because the Ironclad actually loves Relics. There are so many Relics, almost all of them are good on the character. These are good Relics for survivability, and you can basically just replace block cards with these Relics. And that's so good because the Ironclad's very good at dealing damage, not as good as blocking. So if you can just block with relics, you can make your whole deck dedicated to doing damage, and then you're very focused and you don't have to worry too much about filling your deck with blocks or like when am I going to draw blocks versus attacks. If you just have like Anchor, Cloak Clasp, and the Fan, you might not need any block cards in your deck. So the best way to prevent damage on this character is just ending fights fast, and you really just need like a little bit of early block and then high damage to get through the fights, and that's totally fine. So I've had some runs where you just have like an Anchor and a Blood Vial, and that's all you need in terms of like a block plan, because Anchor means you don't take a bunch of damage turn 1. If you kill the enemies on turn 2, you use Blood Vial to heal for the fights that go 1 extra turn, and you can make it through the fights not that bad. It's also totally possible to get your entire block plan from Relics and like 1 card. If you have like Crimson Mantle, Self-Forming Clay, or like Ornamental Fan, this can be your entire block plan. This can block for 20 plus per turn just off of these. So you don't really need block cards. In fact, ideally you're not playing cards that say like block on them in Act 2 and 3 if you can avoid it, because this is such a good solve anyway. So take those early relics and use those to establish your build, and then you can have a lot more freedom in what cards you put in your deck. Because you don't have to slow it down with, you play Crimson Mantle 1 time, it's not in your deck anymore, and then you get blocked for free forever. Or the Strength Relics, there's so many also that could just be run defining. Like all of these, they can completely change the course of your run. You can get it to the part where Whirlwind is doing like 100 plus damage with like Miniature Cannon adds 3 damage. The Sword of Jade adds 3 damage. Vajra adds 1. This adds 1. This adds 8. This can double the damage. This can add 3. This can add 3. This can add 3. So you can get like 3 plus 3, 6, 8, 16, like 19. So if you upgrade this, it'll be 8. You could have Whirlwind just doing like 24 damage per hit, just off Relics. And that can completely change the course of your run. So again, taking Relics can just help you build your scaling if you're not seeing the other cards. I've had tons of runs where you just get these Relics and play some random attacks, and that's all the damage you need. And worth mentioning, I get so many comments saying Relics are bad. I went through the list. There's only 2 out of 96 Relics that are bad on the Ironclad, and it's these 2. Juzu Bracelet just says, rooms don't have combats, and this says you gain 4 block if you didn't play an attack. That's only 2 out of 96. If you take 3 elites in Act 1, you're guaranteed 2 good Relics, right? 1 from the chest and 2 from the elites. So even in runs where you start with these 2, you have then so many other good Relics to build into that it's just worth taking elites, collecting Relics. It makes your build so much easier to set up and to scale. And so lastly, we'll get into how the Ironclad loses. Number 1 is just misplays. Literally every single one of my losses in the last like 2 weeks have just been to like a catastrophic misplay. The other things that get sketchy, and I could see if I was playing long enough I could die to, is like number 2, not having enough damage. Number 3, like having not good turn 1 to 2 block in Act 2. They're taking like 10 damage per fight and you just like slowly bleed out health. And then taking too aggressive pathing, like you're at 20 health, taking 2 elites with no rest can also just lead to dying. Although that's kind of a misplay, but most of my losses are thinking I have lethal on the enemy, attacking, and then not having lethal, and then I take a hit for like 30 when I could have just blocked it or sequenced differently to kill them. That's how most of my losses show up. So if you just play tight, I think it's totally viable to win almost every single run in this character, especially if we get more experience, with runs overall. So in summary, I would say the Act 1 boss is the scariest part for the Ironclad. And if you can get AoE, it makes Act 2 essentially free. And then once you get through Act 1 boss, Act 2, your whole goal is basically just scaling so that you can... I'm putting one shot in quotes, because it's very uncommon to kill it in literally 1 hit, but if you could just scale attacks up to doing like 100, you just need to play 4 attacks to kill it, or 5 attacks. And you don't really need that much block to survive long enough to play 5 attacks. But that's generally how you do it. Draft in a way that lets you scale up to that while surviving Act 1, because you can't start scaling for Act 3 before you beat Act 1, But I think you guys got it. I'm very confident that 95% or higher A10 win rate is possible on this character. So with that, I'll say good luck, And thanks for watching. If you liked it, consider subscribing. And if you want to see examples of my runs, just go check out my channel. I'm posting them all the time. See you next time.